Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Delighted to have Tim with us this evening. In fact, it's a lucky week for us. We had Tim speak at the Quorum in Bombay on Monday night, and we have him in Delhi. So we're making the most of his trip to India this time. Tim, welcome to the Quorum.
Thank you.
We're going to try and cover a few things with you, Tim, and then the idea of today's conversation is I have a couple of questions for Tim, and then we want to try and open it up because I'm sure a lot of you may have questions as well. So we'll try and keep it as interactive as possible. So Tim, I know you've done a lot of work around art, technology, athletics, automotive, aviation, education, telecommunication, but I'm going to bring you to Apple to start with because I think that's the big iconic brand that you were involved in. And there's a quote in your book I read. It said, "Design is not just about how it looks, but the way it works." And that's a quote by Steve Jobs. Tell us, how is it working with Steve? I believe you were working with him since he returned back to Apple in 1997 until he sort of moved away from the business. Love to have you share your thoughts on how it was working so closely with Steve.
Sure. I think with an opportunity to work with someone like that, there's you never quite know what to expect, and I think he was definitely somebody who brought the unexpected to the process. But I would say that what we learned, we worked with him basically every Tuesday for 12 years, up until the time that he was too ill. But we found some very distinct qualities that I would say have separated the Apple brand, but also the types of contributions that he's been able to make for all of us in terms of mobile devices and the technology and things like that. And one of the key things that we took away, part of it was the process, but the other part was recognizing that most people really don't understand what technology is. And we often, and in Silicon Valley and other places, get lost in a technical capability, and we mistake that for technology. And he was always looking at that idea of purpose, that it had to be a technical capability married with an application. And so that application of the technology is actually where the value creation happens. And so he was very good at extracting that in the process and being able to deliver those sorts of products.
He was obviously, he's a genius and one of the top innovators of our time. Any personal anecdotes that were unique to Steve that could be interesting for us, for you to share with us?
Yeah. I mean, we could probably talk all night about interesting anecdotes with him. I think one of the interesting things, we got to know him both on a personal level as well as professional level, and he was very challenging in most cases, and I'm sure many of you have read about how he could be difficult with people. But one of the key things was he had an incredible ability to look at things both from a logic perspective as well as an intuitive perspective. And so that was probably one of the things that made him more difficult to work with than most people, because if somebody came in who was really good at logic and presented a strong case for the logic, then he would look at it, but he would then move over to the intuitive side, and he would assess whether or not it felt right. And so if you reject someone's plan who's very good at logic, who's built a perfect logic tree for this particular case, and it gets rejected because it doesn't feel right, it makes it very difficult. And so I think that idea of finding somebody who is strong both on the intuitive side and on the logic side was what probably made him special, but also incredibly frustrating for a lot of people to work with.
As long as you're difficult with everyone, I guess that works. Tim, A-Think is obviously well known for sort of being involved in the build out of the first Apple Store, and if you could walk us through, how you came about the opportunity and kind of how you looked at the brief and went ahead to design the first store. And I don't know, how many stores are there today around the world?
More than 500, maybe 600 at this point. I've lost count.
Yeah, but take us back to the first store that you designed, and what was the brief, and how did you guys interpret that?
So I had worked on a white paper why Apple should do retail, and the logic was similar to our previous clients, Nike and the North Face. They were both manufacturers, but were selling their products through third-party channels. So essentially, people would come in and see an advertisement of someone, summiting Everest and want the North Face jacket. And in most cases, the reseller would say, yeah, it's a great jacket, here's the features and benefits, but here's a cheaper one, which, by the way, I have a better margin on. And so they were often being countersold at retail because they didn't control the relationship with the customer. And so the logic of the white paper was the same thing was happening with Apple. They were driving traffic to third-party retailers, but never controlling the customer relationship. And so, anyway, we submitted the white paper, and we got a call from Steve's assistant one day, and said, "Hey, Steve wants a retail capabilities pitch. He'll be there in 30 minutes." And it was one of those kind of things. And so he showed up. And we were lucky. He looked at Nike and he looked at the North Face, and he said, why should I hire you guys? None of this looks like Apple. And so, of course, my business partner and I were sitting there and kind of wondering what to say. And we just said, well, you should hire us because none of this looks like Apple. And that's the whole point, was that we weren't looking to create a design language for the designer or the architect. We were looking to design what's appropriate language for the brand. And so, he said, well, I don't know if you've done enough yet, and he left, and we weren't sure if we had the job or not, but then he called the next day and said, come down and let's start. And so we started with a whiteboard and started sketching what an Apple store should be.
And how did that sort of evolve from an idea to the first store and the design? How did that process kind of evolve?
Yeah, it was interesting because we would have our weekly meetings, but Steve struggled to read drawings. So we started with plans and renderings and things, but it wasn't something that he was able to really understand spatially. So we immediately went into full-size prototypes of the store, so essentially making everything out of foam core board, so that he could walk through it and experience what it actually would feel like in 3 dimensions. And so we made, I don't know, probably I don't know how many, maybe 100 different prototypes of different configurations of things over the course of developing the first stores. And the first stores, we set up the stores the night before we opened, and everything looked great. We had the product displayed and lighting and all of that. And Steve asked us, "Hey, what if nobody comes tomorrow?" And at that point we were really shocked that he was asking, the night before it opened. But I think he was taking a substantial enough risk, and back in those days it was certainly a much different condition than we have today, but people weren't selling computers in that way, and it was a big risk, and so we opened in 2 locations that basically Wall Street wouldn't really recognize if it was a hit or a failure. So it was a very safe kind of strategy of deployment.
Where were the 2 locations?
First one was in Tyson's Corner in Virginia, near
Washington D.C.
CIA,
Yeah.
and the second one was in Glendale, in California.
So
we opened them in 2 nights.
Nondescript locations that...
very kind of generic, neutral American shopping center.
I read somewhere that I think Apple has spent almost about $700 million on its retail program. I don't know over what time frame, but they have invested quite significantly in their retail store build-out.
Yeah.
But I think the return has been worth it because they're the highest revenue per square foot stores in the world. And do you think? I'd like to get your thoughts on whether you, looking back, do they think that this is the right ROI for them as a strategy?
Yeah, well, they didn't spend all of that on us, that's for sure. But no, with the build out, at a certain point, the retail team was saying, look, we're spending a lot of money. We're building, these glass stairs, and we're building all this technology into the store. And Steve was of the point of view that the cost of the stores didn't matter. That he saw it as essentially a strategy to convey the brand values. And this goes back to much of the work that we've done both before and since, is that focusing on the values of the company and communicating those values is really what the touch points are there for. But the first large, prominent store in probably in the world is the one in Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, the Cube. We did that store to begin with, and the initial design was with 3 glass panels to make up the cube, for each one of the verticals. During the course of the design, we discovered a technical solution to make it all out of one sheet of glass. And so we presented it to him, and he was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. But then he realized it would delay the construction, so he chose not to do it. And when he found out he was sick, he said, okay, I'm changing the cube, and I'm switching out all the other glass. I want it to be the full sheets of glass. And that was a $25 million change order. Wow. on just changing the cube. But he wanted to do it because he felt it was part of his legacy, and it was part of what expressed Apple's view on technology and sort of the level of quality that technology should have. And then it's been changed out even one other time with Foster's office.
Now it's interesting that he had the foresight to see this as an investment that really was a way to showcase the brand, more than just an ROI on the retail space. Tim, I want to take you to your book, Return on Experience. I'm afraid we don't have copies today because it's not available in India, but for members it's going to be in the library, so please feel free to flip through it and read it. I had a chance to get it last week, so I've spent some time on it. But you talk a lot about, in your book, Tim, about return on experience, and I think it's the segue from what we were talking about earlier, and how you design for human experiences and design for human outcomes. Could you tell the audience a little bit and elaborate a little bit by what you mean by that, and how that impacts your approach when you're designing retail stores, for example, or anything for that matter?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you mentioned the earlier quote about you design things for what it does for people. The idea is that you focus, in our case, if we're going to produce value for a company, you focus on human outcomes. If you want people to value your company, you create things that they value. And in order to do that, you have to determine what those things are. And many companies, many people will focus on the tactic first because it's the closest to what we understand. But the structure we use is human outcomes, strategy, and then tactics. And each one has to ladder up and support the human outcome component of it. And so if you're creating a strategy without defining human outcomes, you may or may not have a successful strategy. If you're deploying tactics before you figure out either one of those other two, then your chances of them being successful or not is very high risk.
I think the younger generation, the millennials, I read that 78% of them now would rather pay for an experience than a product. And I think what I'm hearing from you is you've kind of incorporated that in your design philosophy some time ago, and I think now that consumer acceptance seems to be kicking in, or you think it always existed, but it was not necessarily well thought through or thought about.
Yeah, I don't think it was understood in the way that it is today in terms of value. So, the first part is using design as a strategic tool. It's not just the look and feel, it's not just the materials, that sort of thing. When we look at developing something that means something to someone, we also have to understand the psychology, what drives behavior. And when you get through those 2 points, the point that you're really leading to is that by creating an experience, you have the best opportunity for stickiness, that your brand is going to be recognized, you're going to create advocacy, you're going to get, you know, all of the brand attributes that you want to have if you can create a positive experience. And much of word of mouth, we know word of mouth is important. 50% of word of mouth informs purchases and things like that. Well, 80% of word of mouth comes from experience. So if you're not focused on that, you're leaving money on the table in terms of connecting to your customers.
If you've had a good experience, you're going to talk about it, and that in itself is going to have a multiplier effect on
That's right.
On the perception of the product.
And the early stores, I would say, you know, with Apple, and it's true with the others, is we focus a lot on the behavior model. So how are the staff interacting with other people? Because one of the most direct early engagements that people have is either with the product or with the people. And so emphasizing those things initially in your design thinking and development is going to give you the best opportunity.
You think about it from the way the service flow also works. I mean, that's how
Correct.
Everything, it's not only the physical environment, but the entire experience altogether. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I read somewhere that you're quite sort of an advocate of the fact that the traditional design disciplines, there's much more to design than being in the silos of the traditional design disciplines as well. And I think that's perhaps taking a holistic view of everything to create that experience.
Well, I think that the shift is that we tend to create silos as a product for our education system. So, you know, if I want to be an architect, I take architecture training and I go out and I do architecture. The problem is if you're designing for experience, it really runs lateral to many different types of disciplines. So we see 4 primary experience realms when we look at any project, but one is the products and services. It's what are the things that make you understand a company or a brand. The products and services, the communications, behavior, and the environments. And so if you're creating a store over here on one hand and communications over here by another group in another area, what you're not doing is actually thinking about what the user experience is. You're solving for your vertical. And what that does is it ignores the fact that we experience all brands across all of these different types of touch points. And you know, if you think of any company, that's how you understand them.
I guess it integrates it better, more organically. Tim, I want to talk about design as a differentiator. And there's a quote from your book that said, it's actually a quote from Bain & Company. It said, 80% of CEOs believe that they're offering a differentiator product, but only 8% of the consumers believe that those same companies are offering a differentiated product. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between what CEOs think and what the consumers think. Tell us about the Lincoln car showroom that you designed in China. I thought that was a great, interesting case study, but I think it would be great to share how design as a differentiator sort of played a big part in Lincoln's entry. And I believe they were the last car company, big US car company to enter China. But there was, so give us a little brief on what they did and how you helped them create an experience in China.
So the quote that you're referring to, and usually when I'm sitting in the room with the CEO, this is when they fold their arms and sort of, you know, get a little resistant to what we're telling them. But ultimately, the companies are working really hard to create a differentiated product. The problem is, once they create it, they look at their peers, and then they emulate their peers. And what happens is the customer doesn't see the difference. And you know, when you look at that, it means that if you're delivering product in the same way as your competitors, you're ultimately commoditizing your value. You're reducing your.
So the product is differentiated. The perception of the product is not differentiated, or the experience on how the product is.
That's right.
Is perceived.
Yeah. So they don't see, the customers don't see difference in your product and your competitor's product if you present it the same way. Right? If you're going into a pharmacy and you're buying aspirin and you sell it the same way, then you're creating this commodity. So what we did with Lincoln wanted to enter the China market at a number of years ago. We just finished, it was 6 years ago. So when we first talked to them, everybody was already there. Everybody was selling cars exactly the same way, and they came in and said, "So what we're going to do is we're going to sell cars just like everyone else." And we said, if you do, no one's going to notice, no one's going to care. So what you do have is an opportunity, because you have this homogeneous condition where the market all is identical. Yeah. You have a chance to differentiate yourself. And so we said, rather than look at it from a pure transaction standpoint, why don't we think about it from a hospitality standpoint and be the brand that understands hospitality, which, if you're selling a luxury car, understanding the kind of context that any buyer has in terms of a luxury experience, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel or anything like that, you want to start to offer that. And so we developed the program unlike any other automobile dealer. And for China, the first generation of stores that we did broke all the records for cars sold in China in the dealerships. We just finished the second generation of Lincoln showrooms for a slightly younger target audience, more digitally savvy, of course, so 5 years later. And that one has just broken all the records for car sales, including the US, including all the other markets.
And I read that you advised them to get rid of the salespeople in the store and have more kind of hospitality hosts rather.
That's
because
right.
The product, the information on the product is you can read it anywhere. You don't need someone to just tell you that. But it was more about the hospitality that they offered them while they were there that made the difference.
That's right. I mean, one of the things we wanted to move away from was the majority of car dealerships were selling cars, and they were mostly concerned with the transaction. So you line up and you sell the car, and sell that car, get out of the way, and the next guy comes in. What we were trying to do is to recognize that and communicate to the customers that what we wanted to do was first establish a relationship with them. And so when you think of hospitality, whether it's somebody coming to your home or somebody coming to a 5-star hotel, a certain sense of graciousness, and we gave people tea when they came in and gave them a comfortable place to start down this journey. And in China it was very effective. I mean, it drove a lot of advocacy, a lot of word of mouth as a result of that shift. But what it did is it reflected that we wanted to establish a relationship, which Lincoln historically had maybe 50 years earlier when Marilyn Monroe was buying the car, and it was really about the dealers having some more intimate knowledge of the people that they were selling to. And so we wanted to kind of convey that legacy in the experience.
Interesting. So bring back that personalization.
Personalization, yeah.
You've done, Tim, quite a lot of work with Nissan, so I guess you know the automotive space. I want to ask you your thoughts on Tesla. Have you done any work with them, and what are your thoughts generally on Tesla as a?
Yeah, so Tesla, we had a interesting relationship at the very beginning. When they went to market, they asked us to help solve their go-to-market strategy. In the United States, it was at a time where there were no electric cars. So what happens is the dealerships in the U.S. have pretty much a lock on what gets sold and what doesn't get sold. And so we proposed that what they do is to put their cars in shopping centers, because they were not necessarily a well-known brand, but be in a place where they have much higher foot traffic than out at the car dealership row kind of thing, and to do the transactions online, which meant it was a workaround from selling in that state, but selling from the web. Right. And so that gave them the ability to sell their cars without the restrictions that the industry was trying to impose upon them early on to try to kill them.
But your thoughts on, yeah, I've not been to a Tesla design, but I've seen a lot of the stores online. Your thoughts on the design? I mean, have they adopted a similar philosophy that Apple did? Is it where it's an experiential design center? Would you agree, or do you have a view on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the showrooms are definitely more experiential. I don't know that they've pushed that as far as they probably could have. But the car design, the time they spend developing the product has been where the focus is,
yeah.
And certainly the battery technology and a lot of the autonomous vehicle work and all of that type of stuff. Elon Musk and the things that he's doing are very interesting because they're challenging all of the status quo kind of frameworks that we're used to.
Dare I ask, Elon versus Steve, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think Steve, we loved him and he was amazing, and we've worked a little bit with Musk, but I would say that they're actually quite different people, and at a time I think that what Apple was trying to do, what Steve was trying to do with technology was incredibly responsible, even though it had his financial benefits for the company, but it was quite responsible for democratizing technology and taking it out of the hands of a few and giving it to many more people. I think Elon has other objectives. Certainly the solution to create an electric car was extremely bold at that time, and you have to give him credit for doing that, and SpaceX and. So he's a remarkable individual in his own right, but it's really hard to compare them because I don't think they're of the same nature.
Yeah, well, definitely two of the greatest innovators of our time. Tim, I want to ask you your thoughts on sort of the future of retail. We live in a world where e-commerce now sort of dominates the landscape of consumption. You've got, at least in India and I'm sure around the world, a proliferation of what we call direct-to-consumer brands that sell a lot online.
Yeah.
Do you think the retail store has become more important, or is this the beginning of the end for the retail experience?
Well, we've just finished a large project in Japan looking at future of retail, and they're one of the largest development companies there, but they realized in making their 5th project in this one market that they would not be able to do business as usual in terms of putting the brands in the typical spaces. So they asked us to look at what would be next, and I happen to believe that there's probably a new form of retail that's shaping up that takes into account the best positive things that come from physical retail and the best possible things that come from virtual retail, and that by bringing some of those things together, you actually make it better than either of the two by themselves. So the experiments that we've done, the testing that we've done, the economic model that gets generated from that is actually incredibly valuable for the mall developer. But it means to think about space differently, yeah, and to be pretty sophisticated with the understanding of the types of merchandise that they bring in, how it gets elevated in terms of people's attention. And it's no longer just enough for the brands, but you need to have the the influencers and other people who are actually defining the narrative for that brand to play a role in the engagement. Within
the retail environment as well. Yeah.
That's right.
No, that's interesting. You think it's a bit of do better retail points but less, or it really depends on the product category?
Yeah, I mean, I in terms of quantity, obviously, at least in the U.S., I mean, we have some extraordinary number of malls per square foot or per capita. I think it probably leads the country. So there's certainly going to be correction because we've overbuilt it as much as humanly possible. But I would say that you know, as things start to sort out, once you get past that fundamental real estate, you know, challenge, that the opportunities that you have in physical retail still, if you look at pure e-commerce, there's still a degree of dissatisfaction with that experience. And if you look at pure physical retail, there's also a similar, not a different set of problems, but still not an ideal scenario. When you start to bring the two together, you actually can capitalize on the positive virtues of both and elevate them, you know, much higher.
I read somewhere that I think it was Tesco, you know, the British supermarket chain was, in Japan they were prototyping a one shelf deep supermarket where you don't actually pick up the product, you just go with the phone and scan, and then you walk out of the store and it gets delivered to your house. So you still get to feel and touch the product, but you don't, so you shop. So it's kind of a hybrid to, do you think kind of that's one way in which it could develop?
I know there are many companies that are looking at these different types of scenarios. So we're talking to pharmacies and things like that who offer a different way to receive the products, the different way to market it. The idea that you still need to touch and feel certain things that remains. The other thing that's interesting, you know, sort of a post-COVID insight is the fact that there's been a rapid adoption, obviously, of technology. On the other hand, there's been an incredible sort of lack of human-to-human contact that people are looking for. So it's an interesting time where we're starting to see, you know, people sort out, you know, individually their value system around both of those.
Yeah, no, it's, we've experienced it in some way or form in what we do as well. Tim, I want to talk about design thinking in management. And I know design thinking in management has been, I don't want to use the word buzzword, but it's been prevalent in business schools now for almost a decade. Yeah. Your thoughts on the importance of design thinking in management?
So, you know, I thought it was interesting that design thinking as a term evolved and became so prominent. When you're in design education, it's just part of what you do at the beginning of every project. Right. And to think of design without thinking is kind of, you know, ironic. But, you know, the idea that you have to move at some point from thinking to doing. And I think design doing is far more important. Not that it's one versus the other, it's that, you know, you need to think about all of the factors that are going to influence the design, and it needs to be strategic. You know, it's not just necessarily selecting a material, a color, a finish, etc. But that strategy that you develop then has to work, has to go to market, has to be something that you can deploy, something you can scale, whatever your criteria is. And without it, you know, you can see a lot of people do a design thinking workshop. They all sort of are happy and leave the workshop, and then they realize, wow, that didn't change my business at all. And so it won't do it by itself. There has to be
outcome focused.
There's got to be design doing to go with it, and that, you know, it takes people who understand how to make things. And I think making is a very important part of design that gets overlooked because it's not a theoretical or an intellectual exercise. There's a combination of taking from thought to creation that often happens.
Talk to us about education. I know you're quite involved with your alma mater in Pasadena. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing on the education side and where design education is. Are we doing enough, and what can we do more in terms of just general design education?
Yeah, I mean, I you know, being involved in a school where we're having to set the pedagogy and be able to think about what we should be teaching young people in terms of design and problem solving and things like that, it is particularly challenging these days because of the rate of change is so rapid. From the standpoint of taking the approach to that everything is about design, to me is an interesting thing. Of course, I'm a big design advocate, but when I moved to Singapore after Steve passed away, and part of what we were doing was trying to find a place where we could have the most impact with the most people. And certainly within a radius of flights from Singapore, you can certainly contact a lot of humanity on the planet. But I wrote a piece about Lee Kuan Yew, who's the father of the country there, and I wrote it in the context of him thinking like a designer rather than a politician. And if you think about some of the success that Singapore has had, a lot of it relates to the way you're imagining how people live, work, and play within your society, how they're educated, etc. And so we started working with design research in Singapore, and started to frame what the curriculum should be there. And one of the things that came out of the recommendations was that we would start to institute design as a legacy kind of quality to Singaporeans. So whether they were 78 or whether they were 8, they would feel that design was something that they could own as a cultural attribute. And so from my perspective, that's the kind of thing that we, our world is in a huge mess, right? We have many environmental issues that one of us alone will never be able to solve. So what we have to do is to start thinking about the problems we've created are problems that we can solve, but the only way we can do it is to get people to think about solving problems as sort of second nature to how they live.
So as a collective.
Yeah.
And so you introduced a little bit of design education in the ordinary school curriculum as well, or was it within the design schools?
With community centers where people were, we started looking at a program where elderly people were teaching the skills of making to young people. Right. And there was a big issue with in Singapore. I'm not sure, maybe it's the cuisine or something, but the men tend to die earlier than the women. So there are a lot of women who are at home and stuff, but they don't feel like cooking and eating alone because they used to eat with their spouses. So they start to become malnutritioned and have other challenges. So what we tried to do is to find a role for them in the community to help drive their sense of value and being able to contribute. And it's really bringing skills into the younger generation, which has been lost in many ways. And so again, through the lens of designing a better thing, making a better thing. But the more I think that we can tie that to our cultural quality, the stronger nationally you become.
No, that's interesting. I want to take you away for a minute, Tim, and something that we've been trying to work on at our end. Get your thoughts on the future of work. I think there's a lot of conversations out there about hybrid work and remote work, and how do you see that panning out from a design perspective in terms of the future of buildings, the future of how the office has to react to what looks like a structural change. I don't think it's a temporary change. At least it looks like a structural change. Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we're very active right now in future of work types of projects. So we're doing Suntory's global headquarters in New York. We're working with a number of other Fortune 500 companies on their future offices. And the problem is they're not really sure how to program them, because in the research that we've been doing and with Jones Lang LaSalle, we're still seeing the effects of the Great Resignation, of people checking out of a work type of mindset. And a big part of it is directly related to the failures of things like urban planning and mobility as just fundamental, mistakes, if you will. But what's happening is, I mentioned the human outcomes part. If we use a different strategy and we use some different tactics, we still won't solve the problem. We have to address the problems that in the research is coming out really strongly, having to do with the way people feel about working today and how the types of work environments that they're happy and comfortable and attracted to.
So do you think it's a larger issue in urban planning and the fact that people have to commute hours at an end to get to work? Do you think that's one of the main reasons that, is that a?
That's a part of it, but most people are just opting out of that, given that technology is helping them avoid it. But it's an unpleasant experience. I can't imagine anybody loves sitting in traffic. I haven't found that yet. So the idea.
It depends what car you drive.
Yeah. Even if you have a fast car, it's not going anywhere. So the idea that urban planning needs to start to think about smaller districts that offer the way to live and work in those districts in a meaningful way. We need to solve, obviously, the mobility in a number of different areas, but terrestrial vehicle mobility is only one part of it that I think is part of the answer. But ultimately, it comes down to the human outcome that people have today going into work. If you look at the statistics, things that are almost psychological challenges are the ones that are surfacing the most. So do I feel safe? Do I feel I have the opportunity to create and control where I'm going? Do I have the opportunity to work in teams that I feel like I can contribute to? So the day of living and working in a cubicle, which is really just moving you from the factory line to the assembly line in an office, I think those days are disappearing quickly. And so, yeah.
No, I think we're in the first innings of a major repurposing of a lot of the sort of traditional sort of office and commercial infrastructure that's been built around the world and in a lot of the districts around the world. I think this is the beginning of a lot of repurposing, perhaps, of how it's going to work. Would you agree? Or?
Well, yeah, I would just add to that I think what it represents is an extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah.
So I tend to look at all of these things as, here's an opportunity for someone to differentiate themselves. Yeah. Differentiation and emotional connections are the two biggest levers you have, and there's clearly problems with both of them out there in the world. So if you're able to create that solution, you're going to attract a disproportionate number of people who believe in the values that you're representing.
Who prefer this environment versus the alternative. Tim, last question before we open it up to the floor. Do we get to see more of you in India? Is there some plans for A-Ting to do some projects? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, we hope to be coming back more often. We have a number of projects going on, which is one of the reasons that I've been on kind of a 10-day tour of the country in terms of meeting with people and getting a sense of is the climate the right time for us as a business? We can certainly support work here from other offices, but I'd much rather be in the community, and it's the way we've scaled our offices, in other markets. So, yeah, my hope is that there's the right opportunities, and honestly, the kinds of things that we're interested in terms of impacting the most people. Obviously, this is a place where you have that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to do, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Tim. I'm going to open it up. Any questions for? Do you have a mic?
Tim, hi. This is Manish here. Fascinating talk, and great to learn about the experience you had with Steve Jobs. We've read a lot and probably seen in some of the biographies which released on something called as the reality distortion field.
Yeah.
I want to understand if you experienced that yourself and that made you achieve things you initially started off thinking was not possible, but then when it actually happened, you realized that, oh, and how does that help you each and every day of your life? And are you somebody who possesses a reality distortion field as well now?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've heard the term many times, obviously, in reference to Steve, and I think reality is kind of what we make it, right? So the distortion field, I don't quite get that if you have ambition and you're using technologies to invent new ways to do things, that you know that it's necessarily a bad thing. That, you know, that if you're distorting reality, it means you have maybe ambition, you have imagination, you have qualities that are much easier to say are outliers to the normal process. But you know, in reality, you need to have people in society who are thinking of those things, who are dreaming of something that may not be obtainable, and they are going to be out communicating, whether successfully or not, you know, that vision. And I was lucky in Hyderabad yesterday to spend time with 15 different groups of young entrepreneurs, and they were presenting their ideas. And you know, you find when you're creating a new technology or creating a new business, you know, it's like your children. You tend to fall in love with your children, and maybe you may be living in a distortion field of your own making. But you know, I think that without that, you know, I'd hate to discount the way Steve was thinking as something that's just an anomaly or an outlier. I think that what you want to do is encourage people to distort reality. You know, we've got enough problems with our existing reality that being able to distort it into something that maybe is a better condition should be what ambitious creative people are doing. Yeah.
So it's a catalyst for change, I guess. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question would be, you were speaking a little bit about differentiation and emotionally leveraging when it comes to design. Mm-hmm. So my question would be on the second part. India is a very need-driven society. When I look at all the businesses that are successful, they have been very logically, rationally driven. And so in a society where everything is driven by survival for the majority, how do you derive, like, how do you leverage emotions through design? And how do you, and what kind of emotions can you leverage in a society that will help you sell a product? And specifically a product that could be like a luxury, like a accessory or a t-shirt or let's say a smartphone cover. So that would be my very specific question.
Okay. Yeah. So the two primary levers that we look at in any problem, as I said, first one is differentiation. How do you stand out? If you want to be noticed, you have to stand out, right? The emotional connection piece, it starts to work on a level of the things that drive our behavior. So if I'm a retailer, if I'm producing a t-shirt and I want people to buy my t-shirt, I could rationalize it. And I'm sure many people who enjoy shopping will agree with this, but everybody says, you know, you buy things emotionally and you justify it rationally. Right. That notion is that, you know, the part of the brain that is triggered, that drives behavior, isn't one that has the capacity for language. And so the idea that you're doing something from your gut, that the thing that's driving the emotion for you to to act on something is something that comes from our, the lizard part of our brain. It's a very old kind of, part of our mind. And I think that when you're able to connect with people on an emotional level, you start to activate things within them that are all positive, aligning to building relationships. And when we look at experience, we have these kind of 8 different parameters that we look at. But in thinking about creating an experience, all of those things are ultimately driven from the fact that we're working from a part of our brain that isn't necessarily a purely rational point of view. It's not that you don't look at things rationally as well, it's just that it doesn't drive behavior. And if what you're trying to do is get people to drive behavior, you're going to have a far more effective outcome if you are able to activate that part of the brain. And the example you're using, Nike is one of our clients. Nike, they sell commodities, right? They sell shoes, they sell T-shirts, just like everybody else sells T-shirts and things. But what they do is, they honor great athletes, they honor great athletics. Those things are the things you feel. If you're a fan of cricket and you have a particular athlete that you admire, or a team that you're supporting, that's something you feel. That's an emotional thing, whether you like to admit it or not. You have an emotional connection to that. And if that can be activated, which Nike does fairly consistently, then you have a much higher chance of building that relationship. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for the amazing talk, and thanks, Vivek. That was a greatly moderated talk, and I think a lot of learnings for all of us. So I was actually going through your website while I was listening, and I saw on the front page a line that I really liked. It said that 8 Inc. is a creative collective united by the belief that design defines human progress. I actually really liked that line, and while I was reading that line, I was thinking that human progress, the world is going through a lot of problems right now, whether it's chronic disease, it's mental health, it's diabetes, it's people's attitudes towards the pandemic, various other issues. So have you ever used design to try to solve some of these really societal problems? Because I saw a lot of your clients, but I was actually wondering if you'd ever worked with the United Nations or any governments to solve some of these larger issues through design.
Yeah, I mean, obviously different applications in terms of having social impact or individual impact, right? We've done a number of projects. One I would point to in New York, we designed a thing for a group called He for She, and He for She was getting male business leaders to communicate to the world, agree to share the number of men and women that they have on their businesses, and be willing to share what they pay them, and the intent there was obviously to achieve equality. And so that, from a design standpoint, is an important issue. I happen to have 3 boys and 3 girls, so I'm not biased either way. But the idea is that's one that I would point to. Another one is we helped a company in New York called Donors Choose. Donors Choose is an organization where in the U.S. they typically don't fund schools, particularly in rural districts and stuff, sufficiently. And Donors Choose is set up so that if a teacher needs a shark skeleton, they can put it on the website, and people will give some money, and they will buy a shark skeleton for that teacher. But it's a way to augment the needs, but very specific needs that teachers have, around the country. One very well-known comedian gave his credit card to these guys and said, look, anybody in my state where he grew up, if they want something, put it on my credit card. So he was a great donor in that case. But you know, those are solutions that can be helping with social causes. You know, like I said, there's so many problems that using problem solving and the tools you need to make them a better condition. That should be what designers are doing. If we're just designing a chair or you know, it's like, okay, that's fine, but we can do a lot more. Yes.
Hi, Tim.
Oh,
Hi.
okay.
Thanks, Vivek, for having Tim here. So, Tim, you created the first store for Steve, back in '97, right? And India was not in the whole foray of Steve to sell an Apple phone at that point in time. So, if you were if Steve was among us, and you were to design a store for Steve for Indian market, what would you do differently?
I'd have to think about it quite a bit. I think to begin with, you know, it's interesting. Steve was heavily influenced by India early in his career. So the fact that this culture had such a strong influence on him, and it carried, you know, through his entire life. You know, there's some connection there that I don't know the answer to your question, but there's some answer there that I think there's a connection. Sorry? It would be a psychedelic store? A psychedelic store? Yeah, it could be. Someone else?
Get one or two more questions and.
Hi, Tim. I'm Fatima. First of all, Vivek and Tim, thank you very much for that conversation that we just had.
Sure.
The question I'm asking, I think, is more about the opinion that you might have given your exposure to technology and you know, design. What is your opinion on NFTs, and specifically within, I would say, the art aspect of it, and also this whole concept of ownership through blockchain? I mean, this is something that I'm trying to figure out. I just want to get your ideas on it.
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. I think they're very different things. Blockchain, I think, is a very good technology, very solid way of you know, I guess accounting.
Yeah, confirming ownership or
yeah.
Yeah.
So to me that I mean, I know lots of financial institutions. We work for big banks. We work for lots of people who are very comfortable with blockchain, monetary authority in Singapore, etc. So I think on one hand that's a very interesting kind of core technology that's going to be everywhere at some point. NFTs, I think, are really at their infancy, and you know, like any new technology, any new capability, it's probably more risky. Of course, you know, there's all kinds of examples of big upsides with them. But I would say because it's relatively new and the adoption hasn't been overwhelmingly convincing enough to me. You know, I don't know if I don't want to say you should buy NFTs or not buy NFTs, but I just think that you should be aware of the progression of where it is. You know, we're still a baby when it comes to NFT, and I think there's still a lot that if it is going to have extraordinary relevance within our society, there's still some maturing that will need to happen.
Yeah, I would add that don't go out and buy bored apes just yet. Yeah. All right, we're just gonna have one last question and then try and wrap it up.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
It was absolutely a pleasure to listen to you live today. And so we talk about technology, we talk about design, we talk about emotion and mental health. My question is, how much you incline towards or your idea towards sustainability? when we talk about big brands, when we talk about human progress, we talk about, so it's the planet progress I'm talking about. So how much you are inclined towards this cause?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's probably one of the largest problems that we have, collectively. I was watching a discussion tonight before this event with Prime Minister of Netherlands, executive from Singapore government, and a number of other people on a panel, and the collective complexity of solving issues around sustainability. It's remarkable how interconnected all of the systems are that we're looking at. So everything from food supply, if you want to fix water, you're going to impact food supply, and that's going to impact methane, and that's going to impact climate, and you can go down the list. But sustainability, what we try to do, one of the early Apple stores that we made, the first one we made in metal, we had done some work with Starbucks, and we decided not to work with them, but they had built 15,000 stores. Everything had plastic laminate and formaldehyde particle board, and the only way you could change that store was to put it in a landfill. And so we said, okay, it's our responsibility as designers for Apple. If you ever close a store, we want to be able to break it down into the component parts and recycle it. If we have raw stainless steel, we shouldn't be gluing it to something else so that it goes into landfill. And we never sold Steve on the sustainability thing. In fact, we didn't tell him until after the fact. But the idea was that if we ever closed the store, we had the ability to break it down and be able to be responsible to the entire life cycle of the materials. And that's it's a baby step, and certainly when you think of designing buildings and operating buildings, that's 35% of all carbon emissions in the world. So it's not insignificant that we not pay attention to that issue. We're doing 2 large buildings right now that are based using cross-laminated timber, which is sustainably farmed timber rather than concrete and steel. We're running out of sand with all of the construction with concrete and things. So, we're trying to actively build in materials that we believe will have a positive impact, and hopefully others will follow, that direction.
I have a quick follow-up question on that. Sorry, were you gonna?
No, sure.
It's a great question, actually. You work with some of the largest companies around the world across, a number of different product categories. How important is sustainability in when they give you a brief, or when they talk about you designing for them, or is it just like an eyewash buzzword that people are talking about, or are you really seeing it become an important part of the whole narrative when they brief you on design?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it is, do we have to bring it to the conversation, or does the client have it as part of the core values that they want us to address? And so I don't want to be cynical about it, because I think that it doesn't help. But there are challenges, with diverse clients, diverse environments. In San Francisco, everyone was saying, well, how are we going to address sustainable building, etc. And fortunately, the mayor decided that we have this queue of projects that are being built, and if you meet a LEED certification, whether it's a gold or a silver or platinum, whatever it is, you get to go with your permit application to the front of the line. And if you don't, you're at the bottom of the line. And so it turned out that for every developer, they were going to get LEED certification, because otherwise their project would sit in the permit office for the next 10 years. And it didn't cost anybody anything other than for them to work on the designs that addressed more of the sustainability factors.
Created the right incentives.
Correct, yeah. And I think that's, you have to do a lot of these kind of things, obviously, but that's where, if everybody's looking at the same problem, we can definitely have more impact than if it's.
And that's how I think the young generation also will derive inspiration, or maybe they will get into action towards this.
Absolutely.
So that's thank you so much.
I need to face my kids, in the morning, right?
That's true. Thank you.
Great. Tim, thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time and having this conversation. And we look forward. We look forward to having you back here whenever you're next in town. And wish you all the best for your India journey. Yeah?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys.